Across the Atlantic, the ocean looked empty. But it never was. Every day, steel moved across the water. Slowly. Relentlessly. Ships without glory. Ships without guns big enough to win wars. Ships carrying food, fuel, steel, and hope. Germany hunted them. From below. From the dark. U-boats waited in silence. Torpedoes armed. Periscopes barely breaking the surface. One ship exploded. Then another. Then another. The ocean burned. Men vanished into freezing water. And still, the ships kept coming. No single battle could stop them. No victory could slow them. For every ship that sank, two more appeared. For every convoy destroyed, another formed. This was not an armada. It was a wall. A moving wall of steel and resolve. And no matter how hard Germany struck, the wall never broke. The Battle of the Atlantic was not fought for land. It was fought for survival. An island nation stood dependent on the sea. Every loaf of bread. Every bullet. Every drop of fuel. All of it had to cross an ocean. At the start of the war, Germany understood this truth. Britain could not be defeated by invasion. It could be starved. U-boats became the weapon of choice. Silent. Invisible. Deadly. Merchant ships sailed alone. Unprotected. Easy targets in endless water. The losses mounted quickly. Tonnage disappeared beneath the waves. Crews vanished without graves. The Atlantic became a killing ground. But war is not won by destruction alone. It is won by endurance. Slowly, painfully, the Allies learned this lesson. They stopped thinking in single ships. They started thinking in systems. What followed was not a miracle. It was organization, discipline, and industrial will. From this understanding, something unstoppable emerged. A moving shield across the ocean. The convoy system. Before the convoys became a wall, the Atlantic was a graveyard. Ships sailed alone. Scattered across thousands of miles of open water. There were no fixed routes. No constant escorts. No protection once land disappeared beyond the horizon. A merchant captain knew one truth. If a U-boat found him, help would not come in time. German submarines ruled the early Atlantic. They did not need to win battles. They only needed to wait. Periscopes watched smoke on the horizon. Engines slowed. Torpedoes were lined up with calm precision. One explosion was enough. A single hit could split a ship in two. Cargo burned. Oil spread across the waves. Men jumped into freezing water. The ocean showed no mercy. Survivors faced darkness. Cold. Silence broken only by sinking steel. For Germany, the strategy seemed perfect. Sink faster than Britain could replace. Starve the island into submission. And at first, it worked. Shipping losses climbed month after month. Ports struggled to keep shelves filled. Factories slowed without raw materials. Every sunk ship weakened the Allied war effort. Every successful patrol encouraged more U-boats. Confidence grew in Berlin. The Atlantic appeared wide open. Uncontrolled. Vulnerable. But beneath the chaos, a realization was forming. Individual ships were easy to kill. Systems were not. The Allies began to understand a hard truth. The ocean could not be defended everywhere. But it could be controlled along narrow paths. The solution would not be faster ships. Or braver crews. It would be structure. Discipline. And numbers moving together. The era of lone ships was coming to an end. The answer did not come quickly. And it did not come easily. At first, the idea seemed flawed. Grouping ships together meant slower speeds, predictable routes. To many captains, it felt like inviting attack. But desperation leaves little room for pride. Naval planners began to think differently. Protection was no longer about the individual ship. It was about the group. Ships would sail together. Dozens at a time. Sometimes hundreds. They would follow fixed corridors across the ocean. Narrow paths carved through vast water. Around them sailed escorts. Destroyers. Corvettes. Small ships built for one purpose. To hunt submarines. The convoy was not fast. It was not elegant. But it was organized. When one ship spotted danger, all ships reacted. When one escort detected a threat, the entire formation shifted. U-boats could no longer attack freely. They had to choose. They had to risk exposure. Depth charges exploded beneath the waves. Sonar pings echoed through the deep. The ocean was no longer silent. Convoys brought discipline to chaos. Schedules replaced improvisation. Routes replaced randomness. Losses did not stop overnight. Ships still sank. Men still died. But something had changed. For the first time, U-boats faced resistance. For the first time, merchant ships were not alone. The convoy system turned the Atlantic into a moving fortress. Not one wall. But many. Walls that stretched from North America to Europe. Walls that moved day and night. Germany was no longer hunting scattered prey. It was facing organized defense. The Atlantic had begun to close. Germany did not surrender the Atlantic quietly. When the convoys appeared, the response was swift. And ruthless. U-boat commanders adapted. They studied the new formations. They searched for weaknesses. The solution was cooperation. If one submarine could not break the convoy, many might. Thus, the Wolf Pack was born. A single U-boat would shadow a convoy from a distance. It would not attack. It would report. Radio signals crossed the ocean. Other submarines converged. Slowly. Silently. At night, the Atlantic turned black. Convoys became silhouettes against the horizon. Then the attack began. U-boats surfaced to gain speed. They slipped between columns of ships. Torpedoes fired at close range. Explosions ripped through steel hulls. Fires illuminated the darkness. Panic spread from ship to ship. Escorts reacted instantly. Searchlights swept the waves. Guns opened fire. Depth charges followed. Water erupted into towering columns. The sea became chaos. For a time, the strategy worked. Losses rose again. Confidence returned to U-boat crews. Germany believed the convoy wall could still be broken. But wolf packs came at a cost. Radio signals revealed positions. Surface attacks invited retaliation. Each engagement sharpened Allied responses. Each battle exposed German tactics. The convoys bent. They did not collapse. And with every night attack, the Allies learned how to fight back better. The Atlantic did not change overnight. But it did change permanently. The Allies realized that courage was not enough. Numbers were not enough. Organization alone was not enough. They needed eyes beneath the waves. Sonar became sharper. More reliable. More precise. Invisible submarines were no longer invisible. Pings echoed through the depths. Returns came back clear. Metal answered metal. U-boats that once hunted blindly were now being tracked. Radar followed next. It pierced darkness. Fog. Storm. Night was no longer safe. Submarines surfacing to attack found themselves detected before they could strike. Then came the weapons. Depth charges grew smarter. Patterns replaced guesswork. Explosions walked across the ocean floor. The sea itself became a weapon. Air power closed the final gap. Long-range patrol aircraft stretched convoy protection. The empty mid-ocean was no longer empty. U-boats were forced to dive and stay down. Below the surface, batteries drained. Air grew foul. Speed vanished. Hunting became hiding. Every technological improvement tightened the net. Every new escort made attacks riskier. Losses began to shift. Convoys still suffered damage. But U-boats started disappearing. One failed patrol turned into two. Two into many. Experienced commanders were lost. New crews lacked confidence. The balance was changing. The Atlantic was no longer a hunter's playground. It was a monitored battlefield. Technology did what bravery could not. It removed surprise. And without surprise, the U-boat war began to fail. While the Atlantic raged, something else was awakening. Far from the ocean. Far from the U-boats. Factories began to roar. In Britain, production pushed its limits. But it was America that changed everything. Shipyards appeared along the coasts. Rivers filled with steel hulls. Assembly lines replaced tradition. Ships were no longer crafted. They were produced. Liberty ships rolled into the water. Then victory ships followed. Faster. Stronger. One ship launched in weeks. Sometimes days. Germany sank ships faster than ever. And still, it was not enough. For every vessel destroyed, two more joined the convoys. The ocean filled with movement. Endless columns of smoke on the horizon. Crews were trained quickly. Sometimes barely experienced. But there were always replacements. Loss no longer meant delay. Convoys grew larger. More frequent. Better protected. The wall was no longer thin. It was deep. U-boat commanders noticed the change. Attacks achieved less. Risk increased. Sinking one ship no longer mattered. It did not stop the flow. Supplies reached Britain. Then Europe. Then advancing armies. Fuel-fed tanks. Food-fed soldiers. Steel-fed victory. The Atlantic had become an industrial highway. Germany faced a brutal truth. It was fighting machines with machines. And it was losing. Production outpaced destruction. Replacement erased success. The convoy wall was no longer just defense. It was momentum. An unstoppable rhythm of steel and supply. The ocean carried more than ships now. It carried inevitability. No matter how many were sunk, the convoys kept coming. By the time Germany understood the scale of the problem, it was already too late. The Atlantic no longer belonged to the hunter. U-boat losses began to rise sharply. Entire patrols failed to return. Submarines vanished without sending signals. Crews disappeared without leaving wreckage. Each convoy battle now carried consequences. Escorts hunted aggressively. They did not wait for attacks. They searched. They pursued. Wolf packs dissolved under pressure. Coordination collapsed under constant surveillance. Radio silence became impossible. And without communication, the wolf pack strategy died. New submarines entered service. But they entered a changed ocean. Air patrols circled overhead. Radar watched from afar. Sonar listened below. There was nowhere to hide. German commanders reported fear. Not of the enemy, but of the ocean itself. Morale fell. Experience was lost faster than it could be replaced. Veteran crews were gone. New sailors faced overwhelming odds. Sinking ships no longer brought victory. It brought retaliation. The convoy wall absorbed every blow. It bent. It repaired. It moved on. Germany had planned to strangle Britain. Instead, it exhausted itself. Steel met steel. Industry met endurance. And endurance won. The Atlantic became a barrier Germany could not cross. Not with tactics. Not with courage. Not with sacrifice. The wall was not a single line. It was time. Production. Organization. It was the understanding that wars are not won by what you destroy, but by what you can replace. Germany could no longer keep up. The convoy wall stood firm. Unbroken. The victory in the Atlantic was not celebrated with parades. There was no single surrender. No final battle to mark the end. Instead, the convoy wall quietly reshaped the war. Because without it, nothing else was possible. No invasion of Europe. No sustained air war. No advance across continents. Every tank that rolled forward had once crossed the ocean. Every soldier who landed on foreign soil had been carried by the convoy system. The lesson was simple and permanent. Wars are won by logistics. The convoy wall proved that control of supply is control of destiny. Navies around the world took notice. Doctrine changed. Planning evolved. Protection of trade became a priority. Organization became as important as firepower. Technology, coordination, and production were now inseparable from victory. The Atlantic had taught this lesson at great cost. Tens of thousands never returned. Their graves remained unmarked, claimed by the sea. Yet their sacrifice held the line. Merchant sailors became silent soldiers. Unarmed. Uncelebrated. Essential. The convoy wall did more than defeat U-boats. It removed uncertainty. It ensured that once the Allies began to advance, they would never be forced to stop. The ocean no longer decided who would survive. Human organization did. And from that moment forward, modern warfare was never the same again. In the end, the Atlantic did not roar in victory. It remained cold. Endless. Indifferent. But its silence told the story. Germany had thrown everything into the deep. Skill. Technology. Lives. And still, the ships kept coming. The convoy wall did not crush the enemy in one moment. It wore them down. Day by day. Voyage by voyage. Steel crossed water without pause. Supplies flowed without interruption. What could not be broken could not be stopped. The ocean became a bridge instead of a barrier. Across it moved armies. Across it moved industry. Across it moved victory. No battlefield on land could exist without what crossed the Atlantic first. The war was not decided in a single clash of fleets. It was decided by endurance. By men who sailed without glory. By ships that never fired a shot. They carried the weight of the war. And never turned back. When the guns finally fell silent, the convoy wall still moved. Because its purpose had already been fulfilled. It proved a truth that history would never forget. Wars are not won by who strikes hardest. They are won by who can keep moving forward when everything tries to stop them. And across the Atlantic, nothing ever did.